A good printing quality has three specific components. The quality of the file that you bring to the printer, which is gotten from maybe Adobe Illustrator, CorelDRAW, Photoshop, or whatever it is. We'll get to that in a minute. Number two, the quality of your color settings in Maintop, especially with the Chinese printers. And then lastly, the quality of your machine's printer resources, which most predominantly is the ink and the printer head. So these three components come together to form a high quality print. And you have to keep the delicate balance of these things every time you go towards printing. Now, when it comes to the first part, which is the quality of file that you produce, in this demonstration, I'm going to show you from CorelDRAW. So if you have Adobe Illustrator, if you have Photoshop, you can Google how you can get these similar settings and then you make it work. I've covered a part of this before in the series, but I never really covered it together with color settings and machine quality. Now, the machine part we're not going to discuss because I already have videos concerning how your machine should be, the printer head and all of that. So I'm just going to predominantly cover the file quality and then the color settings. I'll make a few comments on the printer part, but I'm going to be focusing on those two predominantly. When you have your artwork inside CorelDRAW like this, the most important thing you want to do when exporting your file for print is to export a quality that will carry all of your color numbers or all color values at once. And from experience, we have found out that the best quality of file comes from TIFF file formats. Now, some people make a mistake of exporting as JPEG, for instance, picking JPEG. It's not like it's bad if you pick JPEG, but when I started out, I mostly printed with JPEGs, and I did get some quality of print, but it was never the same as when I began to export as TIFF. So in this experiment, we're going to export as TIFF, and I'm going to show you the settings that you're supposed to use so that we can quickly cover up that first part of it. So if you click export, which is the same thing, you can use this button if you're using CorelDRAW, which is export, or go to file, export, or just press Ctrl E on your keyboard. Either of those three will get you to export, and then you come to this place and say TIFF bitmap, right? Then you select any name you want, so you can say stuff, right? And then you press export. Leave all of these settings as they are. Mostly I don't touch them, and then you click export. Now when you come to this place, there are two important things you must keep in mind. You see the resolution. The resolution here will determine the quality of output that you get. Think of low resolution designs as designs that have very clear geometry in terms of triangles and all of that. They look box-like, they look less detailed. So think of the higher the number of resolutions you have, the more detail you have on your job. So if your resolution here is 72 dpi, for instance, you cannot get the exact same file quality as when it is 300 dpi. So these things are very important. Now, there's something you need to pay attention to. It is this bottom here. It helps us to get the calculation of the numbers you have when you do something about this resolution. So look at it when I put 50 dpi. You see it comes down to 6.87 megabytes. These are approximate sizes. In most cases, the file size it will output will be smaller or a little bigger than this, depending on the quality of the file. So, but if I say 300 dots per inch, you see I get 247 megabytes. Now, what is the rule of setting resolutions when it comes to printing? Well, the rule of setting resolution is that the bigger the file size in real life, the smaller the file resolution, provided you are using live sizes. So in this case, you see that this size is 24 inch by 24 inch. I wish you could have feet here, but you can't have feet here. So if you come back here and say, well, what is the feet value of 24 inches by 24 inches? So essentially it's about 2 by 2 feet, which means it is less than a yard. A yard is about 36 inches, right? So it's less than 1 square meters. That's pretty much of a small size. I mean, a table about 3 feet by, I mean, a table of 2 feet by 2 feet is a very small table. So that's how you picture it in your head. So if the file size in real life is not very big, then you are at liberty to use, as much resolutions as possible. So since the file, is not really this big, right, then you may still get away with 300 dots per inch, which is not so bad. And then the maximum output size is 247 megabyte. But you see, if this size, for instance, were now 20 feet by 20 feet, 20 feet by 20 feet, right? So you can see how small 2 by 2 feet is on 20 feet by 20 feet. Now, what is the real life size of 20 feet by 20 feet? So you see, most bedrooms are 12 feet wide by 12 feet wide. When you say a bedroom is a standard bedroom, it's 12 feet by 12 feet. Now imagine 20 feet by 20 feet. It means we're talking a size that is 2 times the width of a standard bedroom. Now that is really huge, right? So now suppose I scale this file up to 20 by 20 and then go back to export the same file, right? If I try to export now, if you go to export, if I say 300 dots per inch, can you see that this number has gone lower? But what is really happening is that CorelDRAW doesn't have the numbers to handle this kind of size, right? So it's giving you some really queer approximations. So this kind of file will not even export correctly. Now, let me show you that that is the case. So now if I drop this file size, which is what you need to do, because once the file is too big like that, then you have to drop the resolution, or else your system will not be able to handle it and you're even going to get a corrupted file. So now if I reduce this size to 100 dots per inch, can you see the numbers has grown bigger to 186 megabyte? Again, let's drop it to about 50 dpi. You see it's still 174 megabyte. What it's telling you is that, so how can 300 dpi give you 143 and 50 dpi give you 174? Well, what is happening there is that your file, now you can see at 30 megabyte, that's when you get that previous 247 megabyte. So you see, this is a real life demonstration of when your size is very big, Pico, use a smaller resolution. Because if you use a big resolution, 2 things can happen. 1, you can spend hours exporting it, especially if your system is not as heavy. I use a Core i7 8th generation processor to export this as we speak. Now suppose you were using a Core i3, right, and I use a solid state drive with about 16 gigs of RAM. So now suppose if your system is 4 gig RAM, you're using a Core i3 and your processor is that small, how long will it take you to export? So I remember one time I tried to export a file and I spent almost 5 hours exporting a 5x3 at an extremely ridiculous size on a Pentium 2 system. Oh, I literally slept there. So these are very, very important things that you need to do. Well, your first question you want to ask is, what is the size of the job? And then you use that size to approximate the size of the resolution. For standard cases, once the file gets extremely big like that, always leave your file at 72 dpi. Right? Can you see that it's 399? Now that gives you the proper output of your design. So once you start seeing that your design is as big as a room, no, then you have to drop your resolution. Now the same thing applies if, say for instance, I have 3 inch by 3 inch. Sorry, let's go back to feet. Let's go back to inch rather. Let's say that we're doing a job of a sticker 6 by 6 inches. And then we'll drop this back to 6 by 6 inches. Now, a 6 by 6 inch is a very small sticker. Most Android phones are about 6 inches tall. So which means that your sticker of 6 by 6 will be a square of the height of your Android device. Now, what that tells you is that is a small file. Again, there are some stickers that are even as small as a business card, right? So in that case, it means the physical file is very small. Now, in those cases, what you do is that you now increase the resolution. Now, why do you increase the resolution? Because to start with, your file size in physical is really small. So which means your machine has to do a lot of work to be able to capture that detail. which means that when you are exporting your file, you also have to export your file with the most maximum detail possible. So when I have a job 6 by 6 inches, now look at the exported file size is 15.4 megabyte compared to 347 megabyte of size that we had previously. Now, in this case, where you have a small physical size, then you bump the size to about 2000. In some cases, I even bump it up as about 3000. That way, I get the most excellent print file quality that is possible, right? So that is what you need to put into consideration when it comes to resolution, this section here. Now, the last part of it, when it comes to CMYK and the color profile it generates, is what you select in this place. Now, with TIF, you get the option to print as CMYK and you get the option to print as RGB. You see every other ones like this, just ignore them. They make no sense. You see, any of these two will work. But you see, if you use RGB color, what you're doing is that your machine will print CMYK your machine would never generally print CMYK. If you export your file as RGB, what it will do is that you are going to force your machine's board to recalculate all CMYK values as RGB. In most cases, you're going to have a bad color. And usually, from my experience, this RGB CMYK RGB TIF will always give you something similar to RGB JPEG. So essentially, if you use this one, you're going to create a JPEG file that I said in the past was dull. I think I have a video on the quality of print, out the best way to export your file, but I wasn't this detailed because at times it's very hard to capture all of these details in one video. So in this case, I always leave it as CMYK color and then I press export and then I would be good, right? So 2000 dpi, right? So we leave it at 2000 dpi now, and then you press export, and once you do that, you are on your way to the next part of the conversation, which is essentially the last part. Now let's go to Maintop. Now you have successfully exported your job and now the file is in Maintop. In the last video, I showed you that this blurry looking thing is not supposed to be a problem to you, so don't even bother about it, because if you go to options and you say picture display, if you say high resolution, the files will come out as they are. So that pixelation that you're seeing is not because of a problem with the file. It's just Maintop's way of saving you memory and making your life a lot easier when it comes to dealing with these things, because the higher the file size, if you bring them at the exact resolution in Maintop, it's just going to freeze out and you spend a ton of time working. I assume that's a bug that Maintop is trying to hide from us, but okay. Now you have brought your file into Maintop. The next bit of thing you need to do is just to press print, and then there's a couple of settings you have to remember when it comes to things like this. Now when you select properties here, this button here, it will bring this little window here. The first thing you want to confirm is the resolution. Now the resolution in this place is not the same as the resolution in CorelDRAW. Yes, they are the same, but you see, this is output resolution to printer. In CorelDRAW, that was output resolution to Maintop. So you are trying to create a file. That's the resolution in CorelDRAW. In Maintop, you are trying to print a file. So you are saying the printer should print at what resolution? So this is printer resolution, not file resolution. Now, in my setup, I like using 360 by 720 dpi, and then I'll come to this place. I also use 360 by 720 dpi 4-pass. There is 4-pass saturation and there is ordinary 4-pass. In my machine, which is a Yinghe G model, right, I always use 360 by 720 4-pass ordinary, so I don't add anything to it. Now, why do I use this configuration? It has something to do with the speed of your machine and the quality of production, because I found out that 360 by 720, even though it's a lot lower than 360 by 1080 or 360 by 1440, that resolution and the quality it gives and the speed of my machine go hand in hand. So I have a fast print at the best quality. Now, if you're using a different driver other than the EasyJet 15W, you're not going to get my exact same resolution. You won't get DKC T1H4C. You won't get all of these things. You're going to get another thing entirely. But the most important thing when it comes to things like this is experimentation. So as a printer, I expect that you should go and sit with your machine, maybe on a Sunday evening or a Sunday morning or Sunday evening. I assume you're going to go to church. You go to Sunday evening and then spend enough time, looking at the best combination of settings that work well for you. In my case, from experimentation, I have a fast print and the best quality. But that is not all the resolution that is possible in my machine. Say, for instance, my machine is getting old, right? And I want to still get the best out of it. I still have up to 720 by 1080. I have 720 by 1440. I have 720 by 2160. All of these will give me a very high density, high quality print, but they would become darker. The same thing will happen for 360 by 1080 and 360 by 1440. They will all give me good print qualities, but you see, they don't do well with my machine. So if you're using a Yinghe model G series as is shown in the picture, then you can use this my settings. Just copy this my settings and use it, because it always works well, works nice for me. Another thing you need to put into consideration is the darkness and lightness in under intensity. You see, when your printer head is brand new, you can always put your machine at 2 or at times 2.2, depending on the color setup of your board, right? So, but in my own case, once your printer is getting old, I like to leave this place as low as 1.5 at times, because you see, the lower this number, the darker it gets. So you see, when your printer head is getting low, it will start drawing lines, and when it starts drawing lines, if you print darker colors, you won't notice the line. So that's my own expo of maintaining my printer head for about 6 months, right? Most X600 printer heads use like 4 months, 3 to 4 months, but I still get to squeeze like 6 months out of mine. Now, I know people who say, well, they've used their printer head for 1 year, 2 years. Pardon me, you are just lucky. It's not the norm, right? So if you get lucky like that, just be thanking God that you're constantly lucky, but soon enough, you come and meet us where we are. So I get to squeeze my printer head for like 6-7 months using some of these workarounds. But if your machine even uses 2 years, then all the better for you. It means you can use this to even squeeze a few more months while you are waiting to save up for the head. Now, black ink, I always leave this as minimum. Ink, I always leave it as CMYK and other stuff like that, right? So, but since my printer head is new, I leave it at 2, and then I click auto set paper just to adjust the printer setting. Now, the last and the final aspect of this color settings in Maintop is to come to under adjust and press this. So you check that box first and then come under adjust. Remember, I didn't say touch anything on FM screen. Leave it as FM screen. I didn't say you should touch anything, because if you uncheck this, your machine will start printing black and white. So now this one is what I said you should check and uncheck, and then once you've checked it, you then press this button. Now when you come under here, leave your machine as sRGB, leave your machine as sensibility, leave your source as original CMYK, and leave your intent as sensibility. Now under this place is what you want to work on. You see, this kind of setup is not bad, because the setup says, well, use 95% of cyan anytime you're printing, and use 95% of magenta anytime you're printing. I want my yellow to print 100% strength, and I want my black to print 100% strength. Now, why, if you leave this as this is the default value that comes with your machine, and it is not a problem at all. The only trouble we would start having, however, is when your machine begins to bleed. Say, for instance, it's printing more magenta than it ought to do, it's printing more black than it ought to do. That's when we generally come here. So if you see that your machine, the black is always looking too solid or is dripping, right? What you do is just reduce the numbers here and then reduce the numbers here. Now, if a color is not supplying enough, then you increase its strength so that it can supply well. If it is supplying too much, then you decrease the strength. So here you're just basically what they're saying, setting the maximum quality of ink that it ought to use. And once you do that, you begin to become a pro. So if you're, for instance, now let's say your machine has a propensity for printing too much magenta on a job, then what you know to do is to reduce the amount of magenta. Or if your job is printing too much cyan, then you reduce these numbers so that it can print less cyan, and then you balance the color. So as in essence, this is similar to your color balance in CorelDRAW, right? So you are just manually balancing it so that your machine can print. And don't forget, Maintop is configured to print with your board through the color driver. So whatever you set here is essentially what you are setting on the machine. That is very, very vital. And once you've done that, you choose whether you want to rip the file or print directly. Now, if you want to print directly, you press OK. If you want to rip the file and print later, you can press this and then keep it and then focus on other jobs. I have a video on how to rip a job, and why to rip a job is maybe you have a large amount of job, you just want to rip it down and then lay everything at once. It's never a bad idea, so you can go ahead however you want that. Now, the last part we're going to discuss very briefly is the machine. So if your printer head has issues, I've already showed you what you can do with Maintop to control that. But most importantly, just make sure your machine is always serviced. Make sure you get the best color inks. Make sure you always service your machine here and there, oil the parts and all of that. The major thing that controls printing quality in the machine is your board, your printer head, and your color. Make sure those are always intact, and if you do that, you always get the best quality print as possible. As always, I hope this has helped you. If it has, I want you to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, turn on the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, bye, take care. I'm on your side.